Phoenix, Arizona, July 15, 1992. The summer of 1992 would go down in Phoenix weather history as one of the most brutal on record. For 17 consecutive days, temperatures soared above 115 degrees Fahrenheit, with some areas reaching a scorching 118 degrees. The relentless heat created a suffocating blanket over the sprawling desert city, forcing residents to seek refuge indoors and testing the limits of the electrical grid as air conditioning units worked overtime. On this particular Wednesday afternoon, the asphalt on city streets had become soft enough to leave footprints, and emergency rooms reported a steady stream of heat-related illnesses. It was against this backdrop of extreme weather that Timothy Richardson began what would become his final route as an ice cream vendor. So glad to have you here. Comment your city so I can bring cases from your region and also know where you're watching me from. Timothy, a 34-year-old father of two, had been operating his ice cream truck in the Phoenix metropolitan area for nearly 6 years. His route covered several middle-class neighborhoods in the central part of the city, where children eagerly awaited the familiar melody of his truck's speaker system, playing cheerful tunes that cut through the oppressive afternoon silence. Known for his reliability and friendly demeanor, Timothy had built a loyal customer base among the families in his territory. Parents trusted him, children adored him, and his business had become a small but steady source of income for his household. His wife Sarah often remarked how he took pride in bringing joy to children during the harsh Arizona summers, providing a momentary escape from the heat with his frozen treats. On the morning of July 15th, Timothy followed his usual routine. He loaded his white Ford ice cream truck with an expanded inventory, anticipating higher demand due to the extreme temperatures. Weather forecasters had issued heat warnings, advising residents to stay indoors during peak afternoon hours. But Timothy knew that desperate parents would still seek relief for their children. The truck was equipped with a powerful refrigeration system, essential for maintaining product quality in the desert climate. Timothy had invested significantly in upgrading the cooling equipment the previous year, understanding that his livelihood depended on delivering frozen products in perfect condition despite the environmental challenges. His route typically began around noon in the Maryvale district, progressing through several subdivisions before ending in the Ahwatukee area by late afternoon. The journey covered approximately 43 miles and usually took between 5 and 6 hours, depending on customer demand and traffic conditions. Sarah Richardson later recalled that her husband seemed unusually quiet during breakfast that morning. While not uncommon for Timothy to be contemplative before work, she noticed he checked his watch more frequently than usual and appeared distracted when their children asked about their planned weekend activities. At approximately 11:45 a.m., Timothy departed from his home on East McDowell Road, waving goodbye to Sarah as she tended to their garden despite the rising heat. This would be the last confirmed sighting of Timothy by someone who knew him personally. The first part of his route proceeded normally. Several customers in the Maryvale area later confirmed purchasing ice cream from Timothy between 12:30 and 2:15 p.m. Witnesses described him as appearing normal, though perhaps more hurried than usual, which they attributed to the extreme weather conditions. Margaret Foster, a regular customer and mother of 3, purchased ice cream sandwiches for her children around 1:45 p.m. She noted that Timothy seemed eager to complete transactions quickly, explaining that he needed to maintain the truck's cooling system efficiency. This interaction occurred near 67th Avenue and Indian School Road, marking one of the final confirmed customer contacts. As the afternoon progressed, the heat became increasingly unbearable. Emergency services reported a significant uptick in heat-related calls, and several local news stations began broadcasting warnings about the dangerous conditions. The National Weather Service upgraded their heat advisory to a warning, urging extreme caution for anyone working outdoors. Timothy's planned route should have taken him next to the Camelback East area, followed by stops in several residential neighborhoods near central Phoenix. However, something happened that would alter the course of his day entirely. At approximately 4:20 p.m., a concerned citizen contacted Phoenix police to report an abandoned ice cream truck in the parking lot of a small shopping center on 32nd Street, several miles from Timothy's intended route. The caller noted that the vehicle's engine was running, the driver's door was open, and melted ice cream products were scattered on the ground around the truck. Responding officers arrived at the scene within 12 minutes. What they discovered immediately raised concerns about the driver's welfare. The truck's refrigeration system had failed, causing the entire inventory to melt in the extreme heat. Puddles of various colored liquids surrounded the vehicle, creating an almost surreal scene in the empty parking lot. More troubling was the evidence of a hasty departure. Timothy's clipboard, containing his route schedule and customer list, lay on the pavement beside the truck. His thermos of water, essential for staying hydrated in such conditions, remained in the driver's seat, still half full. Most concerning was the truck's cash box, found empty and discarded near a dumpster approximately 30 feet from the vehicle. The shopping center consisted of only 4 businesses: a convenience store, a small restaurant, a dry cleaner, and a vacant storefront. Initial interviews with employees revealed that none had witnessed the truck's arrival or noticed any unusual activity in the parking lot. The convenience store clerk mentioned seeing the truck around 3:45 p.m., but assumed the driver was making a delivery or taking a break. Security cameras at the shopping center were limited and poorly positioned, capturing only partial views of the parking lot. The available footage showed the ice cream truck entering the lot at 3:52 p.m., but the driver was not clearly visible due to the camera angle and the truck's design. When Timothy failed to return home by 6 p.m., Sarah Richardson began making phone calls to determine his whereabouts. Timothy was punctual by nature and always contacted home if his route was running late. Her growing concern turned to panic when she learned from other ice cream vendors in the area that Timothy's truck had been found abandoned. By 7:30 p.m., Sarah had contacted the Phoenix Police Department to file a missing person report. The circumstances surrounding Timothy's disappearance immediately caught the attention of investigators, particularly given the extreme weather conditions and the evidence suggesting a sudden, unplanned departure from his vehicle. Detective Michael Torres, a 15-year veteran of the Phoenix Police Department specializing in missing persons cases, was assigned to lead the investigation. His initial assessment of the scene suggested multiple possibilities: heat-related medical emergency, robbery gone wrong, or voluntary abandonment under distress. The investigation faced immediate challenges due to the weather conditions. The extreme heat had compromised potential physical evidence, and the melted ice cream had contaminated much of the immediate area around the truck. Additionally, the harsh conditions limited the time investigators could spend processing the scene during daylight hours. As the sun set on July 15, 1992, Timothy Richardson remained missing, his abandoned ice cream truck serving as the only tangible clue to his fate. The extreme heat that had defined the day would continue to play a crucial role in both the immediate investigation and, decades later, in the ultimate resolution of the case. What investigators didn't realize at the time was that they had discovered only the beginning of a mystery that would challenge conventional investigative methods and remain unsolved for over 3 decades. The answers they sought lay hidden beneath the surface, waiting for technology that had not yet been invented and insights that would come from an entirely unexpected source. The first 24 hours of any missing person investigation are considered critical, but as the clock ticked past midnight on July 16th, it became clear that Timothy Richardson's disappearance would test every resource and investigative technique available to the Phoenix Police Department. Phoenix, Arizona, July 16 to 20, 1992. The morning after Timothy Richardson's disappearance brought no relief from the oppressive heat that continued to grip Phoenix. As temperatures climbed toward another record-breaking day, Detective Michael Torres assembled his investigative team in the air-conditioned confines of the Phoenix Police Department's Central Precinct. The urgency of the case was underscored by the extreme weather conditions that had already begun to compromise potential evidence and limit search operations. Torres, known for his methodical approach to missing persons cases, understood that the first 72 hours would be crucial in determining Timothy's fate. The circumstances surrounding the abandoned ice cream truck suggested either foul play or a medical emergency, both possibilities that required immediate and comprehensive investigation. The initial phase of the investigation focused on reconstructing Timothy's movements on July 15th. Torres and his team created a detailed timeline based on customer receipts, witness statements, and the truck's route schedule. This process revealed that Timothy had deviated from his planned itinerary sometime after 2:30 p.m., when his last confirmed customer interaction occurred in the Maryvale district. Sarah Richardson provided investigators with crucial background information about her husband's routine and recent behavior. Timothy had been working the same general route for over 3 years, developing relationships with regular customers and establishing a reliable schedule that rarely varied. His dedication to the business had intensified recently as the family faced mounting financial pressures, including medical bills from their youngest child's recent hospitalization. The financial aspect of Timothy's situation became a key focus of the investigation. Analysis of the family's bank records revealed that Timothy had been carrying larger amounts of cash than usual in recent weeks, often exceeding $500 by the end of his route. This practice, while risky, was common among ice cream vendors who dealt primarily in cash transactions and needed to make change for customers. However, Sarah revealed a troubling detail. Timothy had mentioned receiving threats from an unknown individual who claimed he was operating in territory that belonged to someone else. The ice cream vending business in Phoenix was largely unregulated, leading to occasional disputes between vendors over lucrative routes. Timothy had dismissed these threats as idle intimidation, but Sarah now wondered if they had escalated beyond verbal warnings. The investigation expanded to include interviews with other ice cream vendors operating in the Phoenix area. This effort revealed a complex network of territorial agreements and occasional conflicts between operators. Several vendors confirmed that competition for prime routes had intensified during the summer months, when demand for frozen products reached its peak. Of particular interest was the testimony of Robert Chen, an ice cream vendor who operated in an adjacent territory. Chen reported seeing an unfamiliar individual approaching ice cream trucks in the area, claiming to represent a larger operation that was seeking to consolidate smaller vendors under a single organization. The man, described as approximately 40 years old, with a stocky build and distinctive scar on his left hand, had allegedly made threatening remarks to vendors who refused to comply. This description led investigators to Daniel Foster, a former employee of Arctic Delights, a commercial ice cream distribution company that had recently laid off several workers due to financial difficulties. Foster had been terminated 3 months prior to Timothy's disappearance after allegations of inappropriate conduct with customers and unauthorized use of company vehicles. Background checks on Foster revealed a history of minor criminal offenses, including theft and assault charges dating back to the 1980s. More concerning was intelligence indicating that Foster had been attempting to establish his own ice cream vending operation using questionable business practices, including intimidation of existing vendors and unauthorized use of commercial routes. The investigation team attempted to locate Foster for questioning, but discovered that he had recently moved from his last known address without leaving forwarding information. His former landlord reported that Foster had departed suddenly in mid-July, claiming family emergencies required immediate relocation to another state. Meanwhile, forensic examination of Timothy's abandoned truck yielded several important clues. Fingerprint analysis revealed multiple sets of prints on the vehicle's exterior, including some that did not match Timothy or his family members. Most of these were attributed to customers and could be reasonably explained, but several partial prints remained unidentified. More significant was the discovery of trace evidence suggesting a struggle had occurred near the truck. Scuff marks on the pavement indicated rapid movement, and small amounts of fabric were found caught on the truck's rear bumper. Laboratory analysis of these materials revealed they came from clothing consistent with work shirts commonly worn by manual laborers. The truck's interior provided additional evidence of Timothy's sudden departure. His personal belongings, including his wallet and identification, remained in the vehicle, ruling out voluntary abandonment. The cash box's empty state suggested robbery as a potential motive, though investigators noted that a professional thief would likely have taken the entire box rather than emptying it at the scene. Examination of the truck's route tracking system, a primitive GPS device used for business purposes, revealed an unusual pattern of movement on July 15th. After completing his regular customer stops, Timothy had driven to an area of Phoenix he rarely visited, a mixed commercial and residential district known for higher crime rates and transient population. This discovery prompted investigators to expand their search area and canvass neighborhoods where Timothy would not normally have conducted business. The effort yielded contradictory witness reports of ice cream truck sightings in various locations, though the extreme heat had limited the number of people outdoors during the relevant time period. One witness report proved particularly intriguing. Janet Miller, a resident of the Estrella Mountain area, claimed to have seen an ice cream truck parked near a vacant industrial building around 4 p.m. on July 15th. Miller described seeing two men in what appeared to be an intense conversation beside the truck, with one individual gesturing aggressively while the other remained inside the vehicle. When shown photographs of Timothy Richardson, Miller positively identified him as the person inside the truck. Her description of the second individual matched the general characteristics of Daniel Foster, though she could not make a definitive identification due to the distance and heat distortion. This sighting prompted investigators to examine the industrial area Miller had described. The location consisted of several abandoned warehouses and storage facilities that had been vacant for months due to economic downturns affecting the manufacturing sector. The isolation of the area made it an ideal location for criminal activity, as it was rarely patrolled and offered multiple escape routes. Initial searches of the industrial complex revealed signs of recent activity, including tire tracks that could have been made by Timothy's ice cream truck. However, the extreme heat and wind had degraded most physical evidence, making definitive conclusions impossible. As the investigation entered its fifth day, pressure mounted from media coverage and community concern. Timothy's disappearance had captured public attention, partly due to the unusual circumstances and the extreme weather conditions that had dominated local news. Sarah Richardson made emotional appeals for information, describing her husband as a devoted father who would never voluntarily abandon his family. The Phoenix Police Department expanded their search efforts to include neighboring counties and coordinated with state authorities to issue alerts for Timothy Richardson and any information regarding Daniel Foster's whereabouts. The investigation had evolved from a simple missing person case into a potential kidnapping and robbery, though investigators remained open to alternative explanations. Psychological profiles prepared by department specialists suggested that if Timothy had encountered foul play, the perpetrator was likely someone familiar with his routine and financial situation. The targeted nature of the attack, combined with the strategic location where the truck was abandoned, indicated planning rather than a random crime of opportunity. As the second week of the investigation began, Detective Torres faced the harsh reality that crucial physical evidence was rapidly deteriorating due to the continued extreme heat. The department's search and rescue teams had scoured hundreds of square miles of desert terrain, but the vast expanse of the Phoenix metropolitan area and its surrounding wilderness presented an almost impossible challenge. The case had reached a critical juncture where traditional investigative methods were approaching their limits. Without additional witnesses, physical evidence, or the location of Daniel Foster, the investigation risked becoming another unsolved missing person case in a city where the desert had claimed countless victims over the decades. What investigators couldn't have known was that the extreme weather conditions that were hampering their current efforts would, 3 decades later, provide the key to unlocking the mystery of Timothy Richardson's disappearance. The scorching heat that had obscured evidence in 1992 had also created an indelible record that would eventually lead to justice, though the technology to read that record had not yet been invented. Phoenix, Arizona, July 21st, August 5th, 1992. 2 weeks into the investigation, Detective Michael Torres found himself confronting a web of contradictory evidence that seemed to point in multiple directions simultaneously. The extreme heat wave that had initially hampered the search efforts had finally broken, but the damage to potential evidence was irreversible. As temperatures dropped to a more manageable 108 degrees, investigators could extend their working hours, yet the case seemed to grow more complex with each new discovery. The search for Daniel Foster had expanded beyond Arizona's borders, with law enforcement agencies in neighboring states coordinating their efforts. Foster's background check had revealed a pattern of interstate movement whenever legal troubles arose, suggesting he was experienced in evading detection. His former associates at Arctic Delights provided additional information that painted a picture of a man with a volatile temper and a grudge against successful ice cream vendors. However, the investigation took an unexpected turn when Foster was located in Las Vegas, Nevada on July 23rd. Rather than fleeing to avoid questioning, Foster voluntarily returned to Phoenix and presented himself at police headquarters with a legal representative. His alibi for July 15th appeared solid. He had been working at a construction site in Tempe with multiple witnesses and time-stamped documentation confirming his presence there during the critical afternoon hours. This development forced investigators to reconsider their primary suspect theory and explore alternative scenarios. Foster's cooperation, while not completely clearing him of suspicion, suggested that the case was more complex than initially believed. During extensive questioning, Foster admitted to approaching other ice cream vendors about territorial arrangements, but vehemently denied any involvement in Timothy Richardson's disappearance. The construction site alibi was thoroughly verified by Detective Torres's team. Payroll records, supervisor statements, and even security camera footage from the worksite confirmed Foster's presence from 1 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. on July 15th. Unless Foster had accomplices or the timeline of Timothy's disappearance was incorrect, he could not have been directly involved in the incident. This revelation prompted investigators to revisit witness statements and examine alternative theories. The industrial area sighting reported by Janet Miller became increasingly important, as it represented one of the few concrete leads remaining. A more thorough search of the abandoned warehouse complex was conducted, this time with specialized equipment designed to detect trace evidence that might have survived the extreme heat. The expanded search yielded disturbing discoveries. In a storage room of one of the abandoned buildings, investigators found evidence of recent occupancy, makeshift furniture, empty food containers, and most significantly, financial records and business documents scattered across a desk. Among these papers were customer lists from various ice cream vendors operating in the Phoenix area, including detailed information about routes, schedules, and daily cash receipts. Further examination revealed that someone had been systematically gathering intelligence on ice cream vending operations throughout the city. The documentation included photographs of various vendors, their vehicles, and even personal information about their families. Timothy Richardson's information was prominently featured, with his route mapped in detail, and notes about his typical cash-carrying patterns. This discovery suggested a level of premeditation that transformed the investigation from a potential crime of opportunity into something far more sinister. The evidence indicated that Timothy had been specifically targeted, selected from among many possible victims based on detailed reconnaissance and planning. Analysis of the documents revealed handwriting samples that did not match Daniel Foster's known penmanship. Laboratory examination suggested multiple individuals had contributed to the information gathering, indicating a coordinated effort rather than the work of a single perpetrator. This development expanded the investigation scope significantly, as detectives now had to consider the possibility of an organized criminal enterprise targeting ice cream vendors. The revelation about organized targeting led investigators to interview other vendors more thoroughly, seeking information about suspicious approaches or surveillance. This expanded canvas produced troubling results. At least 6 vendors reported unusual incidents in the weeks preceding Timothy's disappearance, including strangers asking detailed questions about routes and business practices. Of particular concern was the testimony of Jennifer Walsh, an ice cream vendor operating in the Scottsdale area. Walsh reported being approached by 2 men claiming to represent a business association that was offering protection services to independent vendors. The men had insisted on obtaining detailed information about her operations, including financial records and route schedules. When Walsh refused to provide this information, she received several threatening phone calls over the following days. Walsh's description of one of the men matched physical characteristics that had emerged from other witness statements. Medium height, stocky build, with a distinctive nervous habit of constantly checking his wristwatch. This detail had appeared in multiple unrelated witness accounts, suggesting the same individual had been conducting surveillance on various vendors throughout the summer. The investigation team created a composite sketch based on these witness descriptions, though the heat distortion and brief nature of most encounters limited the detail that could be accurately captured. The sketch was distributed to law enforcement agencies throughout Arizona and neighboring states, generating several potential leads that required follow-up investigation. Meanwhile, financial analysis of Timothy's business records revealed patterns that had not been apparent during the initial investigation. While Timothy had indeed been carrying larger amounts of cash in recent weeks, the increase correlated with specific routes and customer concentrations rather than random variation. The data suggested that Timothy had identified particularly profitable areas and was adjusting his schedule to maximize revenue from these locations. This business intelligence would have been valuable to competitors or criminals seeking to target successful vendors. The systematic nature of the surveillance operation discovered at the warehouse complex indicated that Timothy's financial success had made him a priority target for whatever organization was behind the intelligence gathering. The investigation expanded to include financial crimes specialists who could analyze the broader implications of the vendor targeting scheme. Early findings suggested that the operation extended beyond simple robbery, potentially involving extortion, territory control, or other forms of organized criminal activity affecting the ice cream vending industry throughout the Phoenix metropolitan area. As August progressed, the case file continued to grow with contradictory evidence and expanding theories. While Daniel Foster remained under surveillance as a person of interest, investigators acknowledged that he was likely not the primary perpetrator. The organized nature of the surveillance operation suggested professional criminals with resources and coordination capabilities beyond what Foster had demonstrated. The warehouse complex became the focus of intensive forensic examination. Crime scene technicians discovered that the building had been used as an operational base for several months, with evidence of multiple occupants and sophisticated surveillance equipment. However, the facility had been thoroughly cleaned before abandonment, suggesting that the occupants were aware their activities had been discovered or that their operation had concluded. Most disturbing was the discovery of additional vendor information beyond what had been initially found. Hidden compartments in the warehouse contained detailed dossiers on more than 20 ice cream vendors operating throughout central Arizona. Each file contained personal information, family details, financial estimates, and vulnerability assessments that read like professional intelligence reports. Timothy Richardson's file was the most complete, containing photographs of his home, his children's school schedules, and detailed maps of his daily routes with timing notations. The thoroughness of the surveillance suggested that Timothy had been under observation for weeks or possibly months before his disappearance. The scope of the intelligence operation raised questions about the ultimate goals of those responsible. While robbery remained a possible motive, the level of organization suggested more ambitious criminal enterprises. Federal authorities were notified about the potential interstate nature of the operation, triggering involvement from agencies with broader jurisdictional reach. As the investigation entered its fourth week, Detective Torres faced the reality that the case had evolved far beyond a simple missing person incident. The evidence pointed to Timothy Richardson being the victim of an organized criminal enterprise that had been operating under the radar of law enforcement for an unknown period. Yet despite the growing understanding of the operation's scope and sophistication, the fundamental question remained unanswered. What had happened to Timothy Richardson? The warehouse evidence confirmed that he had been targeted and that his disappearance was part of a larger criminal scheme, but it provided no direct clues about his current location or condition. The investigation had reached a critical juncture where the complexity of the case threatened to overwhelm available resources. The organized nature of the criminal enterprise suggested that conventional investigative methods might be insufficient to achieve resolution. Unknown to the investigators, the answers they sought lay buried beneath the Arizona desert, waiting for scientific advances that would not emerge for another 3 decades. Arizona State University, Tempe, March 15, 2023, 31 years after Timothy Richardson's disappearance, Dr. Elizabeth Carter sat in her climatology laboratory at Arizona State University, surrounded by decades of weather data that most people would find impossibly mundane. As a leading expert in historical climate analysis and the effects of extreme weather events on geological formations, Carter had built her career on finding patterns in seemingly random atmospheric data. Her current research project, funded by the National Science Foundation, focused on the long-term soil temperature effects of extreme heat events in the American Southwest. The study aimed to understand how record-breaking temperatures affected underground thermal patterns and whether these effects could be detected decades later using modern satellite technology and ground-penetrating radar systems. The summer of 1992 had become a benchmark case study for Carter's research due to the exceptional duration and intensity of the Phoenix heat wave. The 17-day period of temperatures exceeding 115 degrees Fahrenheit represented one of the most extreme weather events recorded in the region during the late 20th century. Carter's analysis required examining not just atmospheric temperatures, but also ground surface heating, soil thermal penetration, and the long-term underground temperature signatures left by such extreme events. Using advanced satellite imagery and thermal mapping technology that had not existed in 1992, Carter had been systematically analyzing soil temperature data from the Phoenix metropolitan area. The process involved comparing historical weather station readings with contemporary thermal satellite images to identify locations where underground temperature anomalies persisted decades after the original heat events. Most of the thermal signatures detected by Carter's equipment showed predictable patterns consistent with known geological formations, urban heat island effects, and normal variations in soil composition. However, one location approximately 30 miles southeast of Phoenix displayed thermal characteristics that defied conventional explanation. The anomalous area, located in a sparsely populated region near the Estrella Mountains, showed a distinct underground thermal signature that appeared inconsistent with surrounding geological formations. Satellite thermal imaging revealed a localized zone where soil temperatures remained consistently elevated compared to adjacent areas, despite identical surface conditions and mineral composition. Carter's initial assumption was that the anomaly resulted from unknown geological factors, perhaps mineral deposits or underground water sources that affected thermal conductivity. However, detailed geological surveys of the area revealed no natural formations that could account for the persistent temperature differential. The thermal anomaly was particularly puzzling because it appeared to have originated during the summer of 1992, coinciding exactly with the extreme heat wave that had affected the entire region. Computer modeling suggested that, while the heat wave had created temporary thermal effects throughout the Phoenix area, most had dissipated within months of the event's conclusion. What made this particular location unique was that the thermal signature had not only persisted, but had actually intensified over time, creating a distinctive underground heat pattern that was clearly visible in contemporary satellite imagery. This characteristic was inconsistent with any known natural geological process and suggested an alternative explanation for the thermal anomaly. Carter's research methodology involved cross-referencing thermal data with historical land use records, geological surveys, and any available documentation of human activity in the affected area during the relevant time period. This process led her to examine police records, missing person reports, and other official documentation from 1992 that might explain unusual activity in the region during the heat wave. The cross-referencing process initially yielded routine results. The area had been largely undeveloped in 1992 with minimal human activity and no significant construction or industrial operations that could account for thermal anomalies. However, Carter's systematic approach to data analysis uncovered a reference to the area in a police report filed in July 1992. The report documented a search operation conducted by the Phoenix Police Department in connection with a missing person investigation. While the search had yielded no significant findings at the time, the documentation indicated that investigators had examined several locations in the Estrella Mountain region, including the exact area where Carter had detected the thermal anomaly. Further research revealed that the missing person case involved Timothy Richardson, an ice cream vendor who had disappeared during the peak of the 1992 heat wave. The case file, which had remained open but inactive for over 3 decades, contained detailed information about the search efforts and various locations that had been investigated by law enforcement. Carter realized that the thermal anomaly she had discovered coincided not only temporally with the 1992 heatwave, but also geographically with areas that had been of interest to investigators searching for the missing ice cream vendor. This correlation prompted her to contact current Phoenix Police Department officials to discuss her findings and their potential relevance to the cold case. Detective Sarah Martinez, who had recently been assigned to review inactive missing person cases using modern investigative techniques, received Carter's inquiry with immediate interest. The combination of scientific evidence and historical police work represented exactly the type of breakthrough that contemporary cold case investigations sought to achieve. Martinez arranged a meeting with Carter to examine the thermal imaging data and discuss its potential implications for the Richardson case. The scientific evidence suggested that something had been buried in the anomalous area during the extreme heat of July 1992, and that the decomposition process had created a persistent underground thermal signature detectable by modern satellite technology. The collaboration between climate science and criminal investigation represented a novel approach to cold case resolution. Carter's thermal imaging provided a specific geographic focus for renewed investigation efforts, while the historical case file offered context for interpreting the scientific data. Ground-penetrating radar surveys of the thermally anomalous area were scheduled for late March 2023, using equipment capable of detecting subsurface disturbances and organic material decomposition. The technology could potentially locate buried objects or remains that had been undetectable using 1992-era search methods. Carter's research had inadvertently provided law enforcement with the most promising lead in the Richardson case since the initial investigation 31 years earlier. The scientific approach offered a means of focusing search efforts on a specific location rather than the vast expanses of desert that had overwhelmed investigators in 1992. The thermal imaging data suggested that whatever had been buried in the anomalous area was substantial enough to create lasting underground effects. The persistence of the thermal signature over 3 decades indicated ongoing decomposition processes that would be consistent with biological material rather than inanimate objects. Preparation for the ground-penetrating radar survey involved coordinating between Arizona State University's research team, the Phoenix Police Department's cold case unit, and federal authorities who retained jurisdiction over certain aspects of the original investigation. The multi-agency approach reflected the significance of Carter's discovery and the potential for resolving one of Phoenix's longest-standing missing person cases. The scientific breakthrough represented by Carter's thermal imaging analysis demonstrated how modern technology could provide new perspectives on historical criminal cases. The ability to detect underground thermal signatures decades after their creation offered investigators capabilities that had been unimaginable when the original searches were conducted. As preparations for the physical investigation proceeded, both Carter and Detective Martinez understood that they were potentially approaching the resolution of a case that had confounded investigators for over 3 decades. The combination of extreme weather, advanced science, and persistent police work had created an opportunity to finally answer questions that had haunted Timothy Richardson's family and the Phoenix community for 31 years. The thermal anomaly detected by Carter's research had transformed from an abstract scientific curiosity into a concrete investigative lead with the potential to provide closure for a family that had waited decades for answers about their missing loved one. The convergence of climate science and criminal investigation was about to reveal secrets that had been hidden beneath the Arizona desert since the summer of 1992. Estrella Mountain Region, Arizona, April 3, 2023. The desert landscape 30 miles southeast of Phoenix had changed little since 1992, its harsh beauty preserved by the same extreme conditions that had once hampered the original investigation into Timothy Richardson's disappearance. As dawn broke over the Estrella Mountains on April 3, 2023, a convergence of scientific equipment, law enforcement personnel, and forensic specialists prepared to unlock secrets that had remained buried for over 3 decades. Dr. Elizabeth Carter stood beside her thermal imaging equipment, reviewing the data that had led to this moment. The underground temperature anomaly remained clearly visible on her instruments, a persistent thermal signature that had defied natural explanation for 31 years. Ground-penetrating radar units positioned around the site confirmed subsurface disturbances consistent with human activity dating to the early 1990s. Detective Sarah Martinez coordinated the multi-agency operation that included Phoenix Police Department cold case investigators, Maricopa County Sheriff's Office personnel, Arizona State University researchers, and federal forensic specialists. The collaboration represented one of the most technologically sophisticated approaches ever applied to a decades-old missing person case in Arizona. The ground-penetrating radar survey had been conducted 3 days earlier, revealing clear evidence of subsurface anomalies in the exact location where Carter's thermal imaging had detected temperature irregularities. The radar data showed distinct patterns consistent with deliberate excavation and burial, with organic material decomposition creating the ongoing thermal effects that had persisted for decades. Archaeological excavation techniques were employed to ensure that any evidence recovered would be admissible in legal proceedings, and that the site would be processed with the scientific rigor required for a case of this significance. The dig site was carefully gridded and documented, with each layer of soil removal photographed and catalogued for future analysis. The excavation process revealed layers of desert soil that had been disturbed during the extreme heat wave of July 1992. Soil analysis confirmed that the burial had occurred during a period of elevated ground temperature, consistent with the timing of Timothy Richardson's disappearance. The thermal conditions had accelerated decomposition processes while simultaneously creating the temperature signature that modern technology could detect decades later. At a depth of approximately 4 feet, excavators encountered the first physical evidence: fragments of fabric that forensic specialists immediately recognized as consistent with clothing worn by ice cream vendors in the early 1990s. The fabric preservation was remarkable given the harsh desert conditions, attributed to the rapid burial that had occurred during the extreme heat event. Further excavation revealed additional evidence that confirmed the connection to the Richardson case. Personal items including a wallet, wristwatch, and identification documents were recovered in a state of preservation that allowed for positive identification. The items belonged to Timothy Richardson, providing definitive proof that the thermal anomaly had led investigators to the location of the missing ice cream vendor. The discovery represented a triumph of modern scientific investigation applied to historical criminal cases. Carter's thermal imaging technology had accomplished what traditional search methods could not achieve in 1992, demonstrating the potential for contemporary scientific approaches to resolve cold cases that had previously seemed unsolvable. However, the discovery of Timothy Richardson's remains was only the beginning of a more complex investigation. Forensic examination of the burial site revealed evidence suggesting that the location had been used for multiple purposes beyond the single burial. Additional excavation uncovered buried containers holding documents and materials related to the organized criminal operation that had been discovered during the 1992 investigation. The buried materials included detailed records of the ice cream vendor targeting operation, financial documentation showing profits from extortion and robbery activities, and correspondence between multiple individuals involved in the criminal enterprise. Most significantly, the documents contained names and contact information for criminal associates who had participated in the operation but had never been identified during the original investigation. Among the buried documents were detailed plans for expanding the vendor targeting operation beyond the Phoenix metropolitan area, with similar schemes proposed for ice cream vendors in Tucson, Las Vegas, and Albuquerque. The scope of the criminal enterprise had been far more ambitious than investigators had realized in 1992, with Timothy Richardson's murder representing just one component of a multi-state operation. The forensic analysis of the buried documents revealed that the materials had been interred shortly after Timothy's murder, suggesting that the criminal organization had disbanded or relocated following the killing. The decision to bury evidence rather than destroy it indicated either panic among the perpetrators or a plan to retrieve the materials at a later date that had never been executed. DNA analysis of trace evidence recovered from the burial site provided additional investigative leads. Genetic material from multiple individuals was detected on various items, including some that could be matched to existing criminal databases. The DNA evidence offered the possibility of identifying suspects who had evaded detection during the original investigation 31 years earlier. The most significant breakthrough came from the analysis of the buried correspondence, which revealed the identity of the operation's leader. Anthony Castellano, a career criminal with connections to organized crime families in Nevada and California, had orchestrated the ice cream vendor targeting scheme as part of a broader strategy to establish criminal enterprises in emerging southwestern markets. Castellano's criminal history included convictions for extortion, racketeering, and conspiracy dating back to the 1980s. However, he had never been connected to the Richardson case or the broader vendor targeting operation until the buried documents revealed his central role in planning and directing the criminal activities. The documents indicated that Castellano had recruited local criminals, including individuals like Daniel Foster, to serve as scouts and intelligence gatherers for the operation. Foster's role had been limited to surveillance and information collection, explaining why his alibi for the day of Timothy's disappearance had been legitimate while still connecting him to the criminal enterprise. Further analysis revealed that Timothy Richardson had been specifically targeted because his route included affluent neighborhoods where customers typically carried larger amounts of cash. The systematic surveillance documented in the buried files showed that Castellano's organization had identified Timothy as one of the most profitable targets in the Phoenix area. The murder had occurred when Timothy resisted the robbery attempt, leading to an escalation of violence that had not been planned by the criminal organization. The documents suggested that Timothy's death had prompted Castellano to abandon the Phoenix operation and relocate his activities to other markets where law enforcement attention would be less intense. Investigation into Castellano's current whereabouts revealed that he had died in federal prison in 2019 while serving a sentence for unrelated racketeering charges. However, several of his former associates remained alive and could potentially be prosecuted for their roles in the Richardson murder and the broader criminal enterprise. The breakthrough in the Richardson case represented more than just the resolution of a single missing person investigation. The discovery of the buried criminal organization's records provided law enforcement with unprecedented insight into the structure and operations of a criminal enterprise that had affected multiple states during the early 1990s. Federal authorities began coordinating with law enforcement agencies in Nevada, California, and New Mexico to investigate potential connections between the Phoenix operation and unsolved crimes in those jurisdictions. The documentation recovered from the burial site contained references to criminal activities in multiple states, suggesting that the Richardson case was part of a much larger pattern of organized criminal activity. The scientific breakthrough that had led to Timothy Richardson's discovery was already being applied to other cold cases throughout the Southwest. Carter's thermal imaging methodology offered law enforcement a new tool for locating burial sites and evidence caches that had remained hidden for decades. As the investigation moved into its prosecution phase, the convergence of historical criminal evidence and modern scientific techniques had created an unprecedented opportunity for justice. The thermal signature that had persisted beneath the Arizona desert for 31 years had finally yielded its secrets, revealing not just the fate of one missing man, but the existence of a criminal conspiracy that had operated across multiple states during the early 1990s. Phoenix, Arizona, September 12, 2023. The Maricopa County Superior Court had rarely witnessed a case that bridged 3 decades of technological advancement and criminal investigation. As autumn arrived in Phoenix, bringing relief from another brutal summer, the courtroom filled with family members, investigators, scientists, and media representatives gathered to witness the conclusion of one of Arizona's most enduring missing person cases. The prosecution of the Timothy Richardson murder case represented a landmark achievement in the application of modern scientific methods to historical criminal investigations. The thermal imaging evidence that had led to the discovery of Richardson's remains had been accepted by the court as admissible scientific evidence, establishing a legal precedent for similar cases throughout the United States. Daniel Foster, now 67 years old and in declining health, faced charges of conspiracy to commit robbery and accessory to murder in connection with Richardson's death. The evidence recovered from the burial site had clearly established his role in the surveillance operation that had targeted Richardson, though his limited involvement in the actual crime had resulted in reduced charges compared to other participants. Foster's cooperation with investigators had proven valuable in identifying additional suspects and understanding the scope of the criminal organization led by Anthony Castellano. His testimony revealed details about the ice cream vendor targeting operation that had not been documented in the buried records, including information about other victims who had been robbed but had never reported the crimes to police. The primary defendant in the case was Marcus Volpe, a career criminal who had served as Castellano's lieutenant in the Phoenix operation. Volpe had been identified through DNA evidence recovered from the burial site and had been arrested in Nevada, where he had been living under an assumed identity. His criminal history included multiple convictions for violent crimes, making him a candidate for enhanced sentencing under repeat offender statutes. The prosecution's case relied heavily on the documentary evidence recovered from the burial site, which provided detailed records of the criminal organization's activities during the summer of 1992. The buried files contained Volpe's handwriting, financial records showing his compensation for various criminal activities, and correspondence discussing plans for expanding the vendor targeting operation. DNA evidence linking Volpe to items found at the burial site provided scientific corroboration for the documentary evidence. Advances in DNA analysis technology since 1992 had made it possible to extract genetic profiles from trace evidence that would have been unusable by earlier forensic methods. The combination of traditional investigative work and cutting-edge science created an overwhelming case against the defendants. The trial proceedings included extensive testimony from Dr. Elizabeth Carter about her thermal imaging research and its application to the Richardson case. Carter's explanation of how extreme weather events could create detectable underground signatures decades later fascinated both the jury and legal observers. Her testimony established the scientific foundation for using climate data in criminal investigations. Detective Sarah Martinez presented the investigative work that had connected Carter's scientific discovery to the historical missing person case. The systematic approach used to cross-reference thermal anomalies with police records demonstrated how modern cold case investigations could benefit from interdisciplinary collaboration between law enforcement and academic researchers. Sarah Richardson, Timothy's widow, provided victim impact testimony that reminded the court of the human cost of the defendant's criminal activities. Now in her 70s, Sarah described the decades of uncertainty and grief that had affected not only her life, but also the lives of her children who had grown up without their father. Her testimony emphasized that the passage of time had not diminished the impact of Timothy's murder on his family. The defense attempted to challenge the admissibility of evidence that had been buried for 31 years, arguing that environmental degradation could have compromised the integrity of the documentary materials. However, forensic experts testified that the rapid burial during extreme heat had actually preserved the evidence better than normal environmental exposure would have achieved. Expert testimony from federal investigators revealed the broader scope of Castellano's criminal organization and its activities in multiple states during the early 1990s. The Richardson murder had been part of a systematic criminal enterprise that had targeted small business operators throughout the Southwest, with ice cream vendors being particularly vulnerable due to their cash-based operations and isolated working conditions. The prosecution demonstrated that the murder of Timothy Richardson had been the direct result of a planned criminal conspiracy, even though the actual killing may not have been premeditated. The systematic surveillance and targeting operation established that Richardson had been deliberately selected as a victim, making his death a foreseeable consequence of the defendant's criminal activities. Forensic reconstruction of the events leading to Richardson's death revealed that he had been lured to the remote burial site under false pretenses, possibly involving a fabricated ice cream order or equipment emergency. The location's isolation had been chosen specifically to minimize the risk of witnesses or interruption during the robbery attempt. The trial also addressed the 1992 investigation's limitations and the reasons why the case had remained unsolved for 3 decades. Detective Torres, now retired but called as a witness, testified about the challenges faced by investigators working with 1990s technology and resources. His testimony highlighted how extreme weather conditions had hampered evidence collection and limited search capabilities. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges against both defendants. Foster was convicted of conspiracy to commit robbery and accessory to murder, while Volpe was found guilty of first-degree murder, robbery, and conspiracy charges. The swift deliberation reflected the strength of the evidence and the clarity of the prosecution's case. During the sentencing phase, Foster received 15 years in federal prison, with eligibility for parole after serving 10 years due to his cooperation with investigators and his limited role in the actual murder. His advanced age and health conditions were considered mitigating factors in determining the sentence length. Marcus Volpe was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, reflecting both the severity of his crimes and his status as a repeat violent offender. The judge noted that the systematic nature of the criminal enterprise and the decades of impunity enjoyed by the defendants warranted the maximum allowable sentence. The Richardson case resolution had implications extending far beyond the individual prosecution. Dr. Carter's thermal imaging methodology was adopted by law enforcement agencies throughout the Southwest for application to other cold cases involving missing persons and buried evidence. The technique offered new hope for families seeking answers about long-missing loved ones. Federal authorities continued investigating connections between Castellano's organization and unsolved crimes in other states, using the documentary evidence recovered from the Arizona burial site as a roadmap for identifying additional victims and suspects. The investigation had revealed a criminal network that had operated across state lines for several years during the early 1990s. The case established legal precedents for the admissibility of climate science evidence in criminal proceedings and demonstrated the potential for interdisciplinary collaboration between academic researchers and law enforcement agencies. Universities throughout the United States began developing programs to apply scientific research methodologies to cold case investigations. For the Richardson family, the trial's conclusion provided long-awaited closure and answers to questions that had haunted them for 31 years. Timothy's remains were finally laid to rest in a proper burial ceremony attended by family members, investigators, and community members who had never forgotten his disappearance. The case also prompted changes in law enforcement approaches to missing person investigations, particularly those involving small business operators who might be targeted by organized criminal enterprises. Training programs were developed to help officers recognize patterns of systematic criminal targeting and coordinate multi-jurisdictional responses to such activities. Dr. Elizabeth Carter's research continued with expanded funding from federal agencies interested in applying climate science to criminal investigations. Her work had demonstrated that extreme weather events could create detectable signatures that persisted for decades, offering new tools for resolving historical cases that had seemed hopeless. The successful resolution of the Timothy Richardson case, after 31 years, served as a reminder that advances in science and technology could provide justice even when traditional investigative methods had been exhausted. The thermal signature that had led to the breakthrough discovery remained as a testament to the persistence of evidence and the power of human ingenuity to uncover truth, regardless of how much time had passed since the original crime.